The Medal of Honor is the highest award you can receive for valor and bravery. The Silver Star is the third highest. There's the Medal of Honor, and then there's the Air Force Cross, and then there's the Silver Star. And to have one of those, I mean, most people don't live through getting the Silver Star, but to get one day and the other the next day, and to survive both of them, it's pretty exciting.
Normal reaction is get out of the way of danger. Save yourself if you can. Those are not the people who get the Medal of Honor.
I think Bernie made that decision without the slightest thought of anything happening to it.
He was the first recipient of the Air Force Medal of Honor in Vietnam, and actually the first one to receive the newly designed Air Force Medal of Honor. To receive it alive, it was a big deal. And so the Air Force was going to make a big deal out of it, and they had invited him to come to Washington, D.C.
We have come here to the East Room this morning to honor Major Bernard F. Fisher of the United States Air Force. He is the first air officer to win the Medal of Honor in Vietnam. Major Fisher has won this honor, the nation's highest honor, because of uncommon gallantry in the face of death.
We were living in Kuhn, Idaho, because he was in Vietnam. And he had come home, I think in February or maybe January of that year, that was 1966, on an R&R, rest and recuperation. And came home, and I think he was at home for about 3 or 4 weeks. And then he went back to Vietnam. And I remember one of the things my mom said as he was leaving is she said, "Now don't go out and try and do something heroic or try and be a hero. Just come back."
Rayla Fisher could not have realized how soon an opportunity to be a hero would present itself. Scarcely 2 months would pass before Major Bernie Fisher of the United States 25th Air Commando would find himself compelled to risk his life above the battlefields of Southeast Asia. What are the events, the decisions, the traits of heart and mind that transform a common man into a Medal of Honor recipient? Perhaps some of the answers are found in the story of Bernie Fisher, everyday hero. The story began on March 9, 1966, in the A Shau Valley of southeastern Vietnam near the Laotian border at the A Shau Special Forces Camp.
And A Shau has a history with the war in Southeast Asia, at least from the American involvement in it, because almost every service had something to do with A Shau sooner or later. A Shau is a very spooky place. It's got a lot of fog, a lot of mist. Even on clear days, some people refer to them as the ghosts of A Shau.
The weather was terrible. Rain and clouds hung over the area, causing poor visibility in the mountains. The Special Forces camp in the A Shau Valley realized they were coming under attack. They had gathered information about North Vietnamese moving into the valley from the north and requested help.
And on the morning of March the 9th in 1966, we briefed a mission that morning and was going out to the airplane, and they stopped us and said, "Just a minute. There's another mission that's more important than the one you have. Change your coordinates and your strike information and go there and help them as best you can."
Early that morning, an AC-47, an old military airplane with 3 miniguns, had been directed to go in and help the Special Forces camp at A Shau. While defending the camp, the plane was hit.
And that's when we got diverted into the area to help them with their problem. We checked in with a command post airplane. They said that the AC-47 that was shot down still had those miniguns on board, and they apparently were still hot. And they thought perhaps that the North Vietnamese would take those guns and use them on us, our people. And so they asked us to destroy the AC-47. I turned to my wingman and said, "Bruce, do the bombing today." So Bruce, no hesitation, he knew he couldn't dive bomb. He had to skip bomb. So he turned and went down the canyon, turned around, and he opened the old baby up as fast as he'd go. And when he come across the airplane, he dropped 6 bombs, blew it apart in all directions. And then we went on in and over the camp and checked in with the people on the ground, the Special Forces people, and asked them what we could do to help them. And they said we could hit anything in the camp. especially the North Vietnamese are coming in.
Bernie and his wingman began strafing the camp, doing whatever they could to help out. However, they were low on fuel.
I checked into the command post and told him we had to leave the area. And he said, can you spend a little bit more time? We've got 2 cargo birds that we're trying to get in, and they've been orbiting for several hours with ammunition and some medical supplies on. If we could spend a little more time with them and help them, they'd appreciate that. And I said, if you'll follow me down there, they on top of the clouds and me underneath the clouds. When we get to the area where there's a break in the cloud, I'll come up through the ground, through the hole, and split us, turn the airplane upside down, and come back down through the same hole. And if you follow me, you won't hit the mountains on either side, and we can get you down that way. So it worked.
They led these supply ships through the clouds and successfully were able to drop 14 bundles of supplies in the camp. Instead of flying to home base at Pleiku, the pilots were forced to refuel at the closest site, Da Nang. Bernie returned home that night, tired but full of stories. The pilots heard of the problems that Ah Chow was facing and thought that by then the camp had been overrun by the enemy.
Bernie earned the Silver Star by going in there and leading those supply airplanes in there and stuff to give the camp, if you will, another breath of life to make it through the night.
The camp was under heavy attack at that time. And he came back pretty well convinced from what he had seen that the camp had fallen or was going to fall. And that evening, we did hear that all communication had broken with the camp.
On the morning of March the 10th, Bernie received an emergency radio transmission that would be bringing him a surprise.
I was the first bird off the next morning. Paco Vasquez was assigned to fly with me. At about 5:30, they called us and said that they had lost Ashaw during the night. It had been overrun, and so we would not go back into Ashaw. And just before we checked in for the strike with the infantry, they called us on an emergency frequency and guard channel, they say, and said, take your airplanes to latitude and longitude something. I took my map out and looked at it, and I said, is that Ashaw? They said, it is.
Incredibly, Bernie's flight squadron had been ordered to fly back through the fog to Ah Chow. None of the pilots were sure what they would find there. They only knew that a handful of U.S. troops were still trapped on the ground and needed air support badly.
I didn't know what we were heading into, but Bernie had been there the day before, and this was very fortunate because he had, in some manner, devised some way to get in through the clouds and get down under when no one else seemed able to do that.
Bernie and his wingman Paco were joined at Ah Chow by Luke and Denny, as well as a pair of pilots from another squadron, Hubie King and Jump Myers. Below them, fog covered the valley in a thick gray blanket.
And we were overhead looking for a way to get down, and once again, Bernie found a hole, just like he had done the night before 3 times. It was like he was blessed, and the hole would only open up for him. And
there was not going to be room for 6 airplanes down in that little valley. So Bernie says, all right, we'll go down, and Luke, you and Denny hang. Why don't you orbit up there at that field, and we'll call you down when we need you.
Bernie began his descent. The other 3 followed. When the Viet Cong heard the approaching aircraft, they opened a barrage of gunfire. One of the pilot's cockpits was blown away, and he was forced to leave the fight.
And about that time, the hole opened, and Bernie told us where it was, and Denny and I spiraled down.
By now, 5 of the 6 pilots had entered the valley to find the Special Forces camp engaged in a desperate firefight. When the plane set up a strafing pattern, the Viet Cong turned their firepower on the aircraft. Bernie completed a successful strafing run. Paco followed with another, but Jump Myers, the 3rd pilot in line, wasn't as lucky.
On the second pass, the 3rd guy in the string, there was the A-1 from the other squadron piloted by Jump Myers, was hit hard in the engine. I turned around, looked at him, and he was trailing fire all the way from the engine past the tail of the airplane. Was a sheet of flame coming away from the airplane.
The only decision we could make at the time was to put him in on the landing strip, which would belong to the North Vietnamese by then. They'd overrun it. He just tried to land on it. He folded the gear and skidded about 800 feet down the runway. And then I watched him. I circled overhead for just a moment. I called the command post and told him we had a pilot down. And I assumed he was killed in the crash. It looked to me like he wouldn't have made it because of the fire. And I circled overhead for just a moment, and then the canopy came open on the right side, and he came smoking out across the wing and went after the ditch.
Jump was alive, but alone on the ground. He would only last a matter of minutes. Bernie radioed for a rescue helicopter, but the helicopter was at least 15 minutes away.
The North Vietnamese weren't taking any prisoners in the battle. And so if we didn't get him out of there, we'd lose him. I felt real strong about going in and picking him up. I weighed the factors that it's probably not a good idea. But then again, if we're going to get him out of here, we've got to do it now.
For Bernie Fisher, the decision was made, and there was no turning back. He circled his plane for an approach to the runway and began his descent through air thick with gunfire.
I don't think he ever really really felt, at least I never did see, that it was anything more than a just an event that happened. And again, I think it goes back to the fact that he really felt he was prompted, that it wasn't his decision to make to go in and pick up Jump.
If he knew the outcome, given the opposition, a different way, he probably still would, attempt to go after and complete a task that's put before him. And of course, about this time, Denny and I come sliding into the fight, and Paca's coming down out of the clouds after having just gone after a gun, but he's now got radio problems, so he can't talk to any of us or hear any of us.
I needed some help quite badly because I needed some protection when I was on the ground. In the air, I pretty much can take care of myself, but on the ground, people get close to me, and I couldn't stop that. And so they said they'd cover me.
Bernie missed the first approach because of the smoke that I mentioned. He made a beautiful landing right on the edge of the runway. The runway was short and damaged, but he flew that one very well. He ran off the far end of the runway and turned the airplane around and came back to where the crashed airplane was.
Bernie bumped along the runway toward the burning plane, but Jump was nowhere in sight. Then, just as Bernie had begun to fear that his efforts were in vain, he caught a glimpse of the downed pilot.
Hit the brakes, and he came running out from the grass and the trees. And I seen him, he disappeared behind the airplane.
I did see Jump get out of the ditch and start running. And of course, I was flying an airplane, so I was going a lot faster than he was, but all I knew is I saw him running, and I thought, you had better run faster than that, because, this is real serious.
And it was very apparent about that time that I was getting hit. They were hitting me broadside, probably within 500 feet of the airplane, I assume. They were that close.
In the air above the runway, the pilots stepped up their cover fire.
Luke then set up an attack pattern so that we could attack the east side of the runway, again away from where the downed airman was hiding.
We were strafing down, and that's where we were trying to keep the bad guys away. I mean, we were doing just about everything you could to not be a target. Someone said at one time that it was like flying inside a Yankee Stadium and everybody in the cheap seats had guns, because it was a very small area to maneuver.
Meanwhile, Bernie waited breathlessly to pull Jump into the cockpit.
I waited and waited. It seemed like an awful long while, and then I realized that he probably got hit getting into the airplanes. So I locked the brakes and crawled over the right side, went out of the cockpit, and as I went back toward the trailing edge, looking back there, here he was back on the trailing edge of the wing trying to get up on the airplane. He crawled up on his hands and knees till he got to the cockpit. And he put his head and arms in the cockpit, and I stood up and straddled him, reached down and grabbed him by his breeches and pulled, and he went head first right down on the floor.
Jump was finally in the cockpit. The real challenge now would be to get back into the air. To do that, Bernie was counting on renewed cover fire from his squadron.
Luke says, okay, let's make one more pass, or let's hit the fort. And I said, I'm Winchester, Luke. I'm Guy Thing. And he says, me too.
We didn't have any rounds left in our machine guns. Actually, cannon is what the airplane carried. But John decided that we would make it a final pass and keep their heads down, and we did that.
Didn't even take time to strap in. We just spun the airplane around and hoped that we had enough runway to take off on.
John and Denny left the valley at that time, and I reversed, came back down, and joined up behind Bernie, and about that time we went into the clouds I left.
I looked the airplane over, and golly sakes, they had really done a lot of damage to the airplane. And so we headed for Pleiku. When we were on the way in, I called ahead and said I needed an ambulance to meet me at the runway, and they said they knew about the pickup. They were standing by.
With the rescue completed, the pilots limped back to base. Before long, their story would spread like wildfire through the U.S. war correspondents to the American press, and Idaho would prepare to welcome home a new hero.
It was a Saturday morning. Mom said, "Come on down, there's a guy on the phone that wants to talk to you. He's a reporter." I said, "What does he want to talk to us for?" And he says, "Well, your dad's a hero. Your dad's a hero." And I said, "What'd he do?" "I don't know, but come down and talk to him anyway."
A lot of attention was shown on our family real shortly after that, because it was in national news, it was in the local radio. Some of the teachers were just really proud that somebody from CUNA had been able to do such an amazing thing, and they mentioned it to me how what a great person they thought my dad was because of this rescue.
From then on, our lives changed. All of us it did. When you're a Medal of Honor recipient, most of the activities and things like that are directed toward the recipient of the medal. But it affects the family too.
While Bernie's family had been adjusting to news of the rescue at home, the pilots had been telling their own story back in Vietnam.
And Luke and I went into there, talked to their intelligence people, and we said, "You are not going to believe what we're going to tell you. But as God is my witness, this is what happened." All of the things that had to come together there just to make it work. It was just meant to be, the good Lord kind of points you in directions for some reasons, and it was like, you could have practiced that for a year, and it wouldn't have come off like it did.
Anyway, they took us up to the protocol office. Said, "Well, Bernie, what do you think this deserves for the actions that you've been involved today?" And I said, it's very difficult to write on one's own self. No, he says, "Give me some clues what you think this is worth." And I said, "Well, I didn't know, but I knew somebody that had received a Silver Star once, and it kind of fell in that category." And he said, "We've just been in touch with the Pentagon, and they concur with the Medal of Honor."
For actions during 39 hours of heavy attack on the Special Forces camp near the Laotian border in Vietnam, Major Bernie Fisher would be decorated twice. For risking his life to lead supply ships through hazardous weather on March 9, 1966, he would receive the Silver Star, and for landing his plane under heavy enemy fire to rescue a fellow pilot the following day, he would be recommended to receive the highest award the U.S. military can bestow.
The Medal of Honor is issued to someone who exemplifies or demonstrates this bravery under fire. It's always given to someone in combat, for something done in combat.
The Medal of Honor is not given to just somebody who does something good. It says above and beyond the call of duty. He has to do something that would not be expected of an ordinary person.
We knew that he'd been recommended for the Medal of Honor. There's an approval process that takes a period of time. And so it was about a year later that he was notified, or somebody was notified, that he had received the Medal of Honor.
My mother was there, and the family, and all of our brothers and sisters, and they had sent 2 airplanes out across the country and picked them all up and brought them to the White House. And it was a beautiful day, and the Secretary of the Air Force made the comments, and then the President pinned the medal on, draped the Medal of Honor over my shoulder. And he gave my mother a big hug, and she's been a Democrat ever since.
I had the chance to talk to some of the other Medal of Honor recipients, and I think that my dad is almost like a hero's hero, because the ones that I talked to, they really looked up to him, because he really emanates what that's all about. He's humble. He did a great deed. He would do it again in a heartbeat, I think. He has no qualms about what he did.
I think other people would have done the same thing if put in Dad's position. But I don't think that everybody would be able to manage the same way he's done.
With everything else taken into consideration, he's still the same person. You know, he's still a Idaho farmer.
Life can dramatically change for a Medal of Honor recipient, but most of those close to Bernie Fisher will tell you that he hasn't changed much. In fact, for many of them, he was a hero even before that fateful day in March of 1966.
As far as a personal hero to me, it's not because of that one incident. It's because of the life that he's led, for the person that he is, that I could. He's always been somebody that I could count on, that I could trust, who's helped me out in lots of situations.
I think a hero is someone that you look up to, somebody that you'd like to be like. You'd like to be able to do the things that they do. I look to him as a hero. In my life, I've tried to do things like him. I remember when I was young, my mother saying, "You'll have to be pretty special to be as great a dad as your dad is," and that's always stuck with me.
I think for me, my father probably demonstrates humility more than anybody. Here's a person who, frankly, receives an awful lot of accolades and a lot of attention, and yet he's the first one when you go someplace and there's 3 people, he's the one who's going to sit in the back of the car.
I don't think his personal honesty and integrity or personality and all of that was affected by the recognition that this incident brought him. I think still the same solid old Bernie, and all-American citizen.
I've heard it said many times that if you want to be to like yourself, to be proud of yourself, to do things for other people that you never tell them about. You do things for people that they're not aware of, but yet can help them in their lives and help other people. That gives you a pride that you can't reach any other way. The Medal of Honor, of course, is a very high award and very, very worthy. And I'm certainly honored to have received it, and I owe an awful lot to Phyllis, who made it possible. I think I owe my life to these young guys who protected me while I was on the ground. John Lucas and Denny Haig, Paco Vasquez.
There are different levels of heroes, and I was fortunate to have been associated with the top level. But it is not a comic book concept. It is not a movie concept. It is a real life thing that you feel privileged to have observed firsthand when it happens to you.
He was viewed as an excellent pilot. There was no question at all that he was an excellent pilot. He was one that you look to. And as a leader, I think by example, and that's, you hear that's a title saying lead by example, but he really did. He not only walked the talk, or talked the talk, but he also walked the talk. He said this is the way to do it. That's the way he did it.
I tell you what's really amazing is he's never quit believing in it all. The country, the flag, God, family. There's just not many people like Bernie Fisher.